You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike.
Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan. I'm here with Mr. Brett Newcomb.
How are you today?
So you were saying your favorite food is Chinese?
I was saying that in my somewhat less than extensive travels around the world, I've never been in a town anywhere that didn't have a Chinese restaurant.
Yeah. And then I was telling you that Jane Goodall believes in extraterrestrials, Sasquatch, and Yetis. And so you said what?
I said I would find extraterrestrials to be more believable and acceptable as a reality than Sasquatch.
Right.
Because I think it'd be really hard for someone that, or something that is Sasquatch is defined, to have a place to live without being noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
And then I made the racist joke that there's probably a Chinese restaurant in the town near him.
Right, and that the inference was that
Right.
Sasquatch must eat Chinese food.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which I think that's the breaking news.
Yeah.
Sasquatch's favorite food, Chinese.
Well, maybe.
So, how are you today?
I'm good.
Yeah, it is summertime in St. Louis, Missouri, which is...
It just happened this week, in 2 days. You know what they say about St. Louis weather?
Just wait 24
10 minutes, yeah.
But man, just the last couple of days, it's been really hot, really humid.
Yeah.
So, things like that happen, and then you start thinking about, I could go live somewhere else, but then we never do, so...
Well, we think about a lot of things we never do. It just makes us normal.
Yeah.
If only, woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Yeah.
All the missed opportunities in life. So, one of the things that is... Okay, let me start a different way. If you had to, off the top of your head, say... what is the single most important skill that a person could have as a psychotherapist? What would that be?
What? I think the single most important skill I would say is attending.
Yeah.
Which is paying attention and listening.
Right.
And then reflecting back to check for accuracy, to make sure that the person that you're attending to feels seen and heard and accepted. Mm-hmm. So that all starts with good listening.
Good listening.
Yeah.
And yet we read articles, and I'm going to enclose an article in what we do in the notes that I post with the show. But I've read hundreds of articles on listening. And at their core, they all have something to do with what you just said, which is attending, which is making the other person feel heard. And to me, I think that is, if we are talking about what's the difference between listening and paying lip service to listening, to me, that's the difference, is the other person feels actually heard and seen as an individual.
There's been a lot of research that emphasizes both the verbal component of listening and the nonverbal component of listening. But the data shows that most of us don't listen, we turn talk.
Yeah.
So while you're talking, in part because of the science, my mental process can formulate sentences and thoughts and words probably 6 times faster than I can speak them articulately. And if I'm speaking articulately, your mental process is checking in to see, okay, what's he talking about? Where's he going with that? And then you go away and formulate 4 or 5 responses. And then you come back and see if I'm still saying the same thing as slowly as I was. And then you go away and think about other things, wonder what time it is, where you're going for lunch, what your wife's doing. Then you come back and I'm still talking about the same. And you already knew the main gist of what I was saying because it was topically focused. So you've gone off 5 or 6 times in a cycle, and you're ready with a packaged response the minute I shut up. And if you get tired of waiting, you'll start to signal and cue me, yeah, and whatever, nod your head, and so that I get the message non-verbally. Say, it's my turn. Shut up. And then if I don't take that, you'll override it and you'll interrupt me. So and then you go off. And so then I do the same thing in reverse. I listen to what you're saying, but I immediately start going off and sidelining what I want to say in response, or thinking about something else altogether, and coming back, checking in, checking out, checking in, checking out. That's the way most people listen, and we turn talk.
Right.
And we learn the nonverbal cues to signal the exchange. So if I've known you for a lot of years, I know from watching your body language when it's your turn to talk, or when you want it to be your turn to talk.
Right. So in therapy, one of the things that I'm aware of is that when the client speaks, there are a lot of times when they say something and it triggers a response, and I hold on to the response until I find, as long as it remains relevant. I mean, then the client could take a shift and then it's not. But so do you think that that's okay? Is it okay for a therapist to be listening to the dialogue that the client is reporting to come up with a response and to hang on to that and then deliver it? Or do you think that you should listen to the whole message before you even attempt to try and formulate a reaction?
So the article that's going to accompany this conversation says there's no such thing really as multitasking, and you shouldn't multitask. But what I used to try to train people who wanted to be therapists to understand is that you have to listen on 2 or 3 channels at the same time. I listen to your words, I listen to your nonverbals, I listen to the patterns of our conversations over time, and I retain those in my awareness. And so if something is off, it's like an alarm going off, and I notice it. And at some point when you stop talking, I'm going to say, Mike, something seems to be off, and I'm not sure what it is. Can you help me? And you'll say, oh, no, I'm fine. No, there's nothing going on. I'm like, okay, I need to check, because it's really important for me to hear you accurately. It's what you pay me for, and that's what we're here to do. But I have to think about the patterns I know how you live your life. I have to think about the themes that you repeatedly talk to me about, what's going on. And you'll have today's focus. You'll have the crisis of the moment, or you'll be focused on something that's really important to you, but it's one-dimensional. And there are other dimensions of you that I need to listen to and check in with. It's almost like talking to a multiple, as if we were all multiples. So I think part of being a good clinician is developing that awareness that sort of percolates in the background of your consciousness, and will knock on the door and say, hey, wait a minute, ask him about this. So I listen to your conversation and I give you feedback, and I check to say, so this week you're just really focused on this, am I getting that right? And that's how we teach couples when we do couples therapy. You listen to what they say, then you repeat it, and you say, here's what I heard you say verbally, here are the feelings I got from you when you said it. Did I hear you accurately? And until the partner says yes, you have to just keep, you say, well, really repeat it again. And you ask them to tell it again. And then you say, okay, this is what I heard you say. These are the feelings I got from you as you were saying it. Am I hearing you accurately? So you teach people to do that. But for a therapist, you have to go a deeper level. You have to listen sort of with your background training, saying, wait a minute, there's a red flag. Come back to that. And so as you said, sometimes you wait, you bring it up later, and sometimes you have to interrupt and say, whoa, hold on, something's going on.
So you do think that there are times in therapy where it is appropriate to interrupt the client to stop their free flow of information, and then say, hey, I need to check in and see if this is something that I heard accurately.
Right.
Yeah. And my best story about listening is, so when my kids were little and I used to watch a lot of football, what I would tell people is, if my kids walk into the room and they say, hey, Dad, I can hear them, but to actually listen to them, I have to turn the football game off and I actually have to look at them.
Right.
And so people get caught up in the jargon about hearing, listening. I don't care what you call it, but what it requires is a focus on that individual, and a focus on the individual, not just from the listener's perspective, right? Like, I'm watching the football game, I'm saying, yes, go ahead, child, talk to me. That's not good enough. You have to make the receiver, the person who is speaking, you have to make them believe and feel like your focus is on them, which is easier to do in therapy because obviously you're sitting in a room with somebody and hopefully you're only paying attention to that individual, but that doesn't mean that they feel it. Right. And so you as a clinician, your job is to make sure that their experience is that they are speaking and you are listening to them. And the way that you do that is by what you aptly said is by the attending. And the way you make sure that they feel attended to is that you check in with them. So you're rephrasing things that they say, you're asking them for clarification, and those should always be obviously open-ended questions. So when we do therapy, we talk about open-ended and closed-ended questions. And since you're the person that taught me that, what's the difference between an open-ended and a closed-ended question?
Well, a closed-ended question is one that has definitive answer. Are you warm?
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the end of the thing. An open-ended question is one that invites you to speculate and continue wherever it is you need to go. There's another thing I want to bring up, too, though, about clinical skills that is a question for therapists to be able to answer. And that is, there two elements. One is things going on in your own life. I had a friend that died recently. I'm grieving the loss of that friend. I come to work today, and you start talking about somebody dying, and it triggers all kinds of things in me. Am I listening to me, or am I listening to you? And if I have a headache today, my stomach hurts from whatever reason, my friend's death or the grieving that I'm doing, or physically I have a head cold. It's pollen season in St. Louis. Do I need to take the day off? Because can I responsibly listen to you and take your money if I'm not able to attend? So that's one thing. The other thing is, as I've gotten older, my hearing is diminished. I can't discriminate your voice out of background noises. If I'm watching a TV show and you say something to me, I would literally have to turn the TV show off. I do now in order to listen to you. My wife and I are learning this as an ongoing thing. We've been together for 35 years, and I'm used to hearing her talk to me in the background and track something else because I was able to do that. Now I'm not. And, and I ask her to repeat things because she speaks softly, and she gets frustrated because I'll ask 3 or 4 repetitions I'm not getting. And I watch her get frustrated, and I apologize and say, I'm really sorry. I'm just struggling to hear. As a clinician, do I bring that to work? Or is it time for me to quit? Yeah.
That's actually something that I've never considered before, but is a super relevant point. If you are having difficulty, and obviously, I guess what my recommendation would be that if you're having that experience, the first thing you do is go see a doctor, go see an audiologist, and see if there's something that can help you be able to hear better. But if you're really, really, I remember, do you remember when Rush Limbaugh died?
No,
okay.
It wasn't significant in my consciousness.
Yeah, right. Rush Limbaugh was a conservative talk show guy. Tony Snow, who worked in the White House for a long time, took his place. And the reason that I remember this is because originally, and not when Rush Limbaugh died, but he stopped doing his show. This was before he passed away. But he stopped doing his show, and the reason was because he couldn't hear. And when that happened, I actually thought that I was losing my hearing. Like, it was happening at the same time. Tony Snow took over Rush Limbaugh's show. Rush Limbaugh was talking about he couldn't hear. And it wasn't because, I was simpatico with Rush Limbaugh. I went to the doctor and I said, hey, what's going on? I'm having problems hearing people, and that's my whole livelihood. I could work blind. I could work paralyzed. I can't work deaf. And the doctor did a cursory examination and said, Michael, you're getting older, and the allergies that you have that didn't bother you when you were younger now are having an effect on you. And he prescribed me a decongestant, and I was fine. So the first thing to do is go to the doctor and get it checked out, because maybe something is going on.
Which, again, clinically is the thing we recommend to clients all the time. They come in and complain about things, and they're struggling with things, and you say, let's get a physical checkup. And you refer them out to a physician. If that solves the problem, they don't need to come and pay you money.
Right. Well, or, yes, but I'm thinking more in terms of the clinician taking their own advice and going and getting it checked out. Okay, let's take our break, and when we come back, I'm going to ask you a question.
Hey everybody, Dr. Michael Mahan here from Psych with Mike, and I couldn't be more excited to talk to you about Athletic Greens, which is a new sponsor we have here on the show. I started taking Athletic Greens, watching some YouTube videos, and doing my own research. I wanted to add something to my daily workout program to give me some energy and to support gut health. And that was the one thing that kept coming up again and again with Athletic Greens, is the guy who started the company did a bunch of research because he was having some gut health issues that he couldn't get any resolution for. He developed Athletic Greens, and it's just exploded from there. So it's 75 superfoods, vitamins, minerals, probiotics, whole food sources that's all in one daily scoop. You put it in 8 or 12 ounces of water, you shake it up, and you drink it. The taste is very, very drinkable. I actually enjoy it, and I have been using it, and my energy levels have just been through the roof. I really like Athletic Greens because of some of the sustainability things that they do. So they buy carbon credits and, to help protect the rainforest, which is something that I really like. But if you order Athletic Greens in your subscription, you're going to also get a year's supply of their vitamin D supplementation and 5 free travel packs. And that vitamin D is so important during those winter months when we're not getting enough sunlight. We've talked about how that decreases your mood and increases depression, and that can be a real deal changer. So you go to athleticgreens.com/emerging. That's athleticgreens.com/EMERGING. That's the Psych with Mike promo, and you're going to get that additional vitamin D support for a year and 5 free travel packs. So take control of your own health today. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.
Okay, we're back. And so, then if the therapist goes to the doctor, they get it checked out, and the doctor says, well, it's just a natural form of aging and you are losing your hearing, what would you say to a therapist? What would a therapist in that situation do?
So again, at the end of the day, are you ethically functional to do your job? But there are things that you can do. For instance, if you traditionally have low-grade background music playing in your sessions, turn the music off. If you're set 10, 12 feet away, move 4 to 6 feet away. And then make sure you're looking at them. Make sure you're physically looking at them. I've had clients throughout my career that'll come in and at some point they'll interrupt themselves and say, stop looking at me. Because I look at them and I pay attention. I'm watching their body language. I'm watching their facial expressions, but more than their face, because their body will tell you more. Their breathing will tell you, their fidgeting, their knee bump, their hand movements, their stereotypical pattern movements, whatever, are telling you something, and you're listening to hear what it is that it's saying. Right.
And I've always been a big believer that nonverbal behavior is much more relevant in psychotherapy than the verbal message. Even if that isn't true.
More accurate.
Yeah. And gives you more information, I think, because there's more of it. I mean, people don't recognize that only 15% at most of the communication that we have as human beings is that verbal spoken message. Everything else is all nonverbal information. And so the overwhelming majority of information that we get from other people is nonverbal, which we just recently did a show on, talking over screens and what is the impact that that's going to have on how we communicate.
Yeah.
Because I'm very, very concerned about that. And in that show, I was much more dark and negative than you were. And you were talking about all of the good things that the evolution of technology has brought us. And I just see it as a real negative, because I see people changing the ways that they interact and filling in the pieces of missing information with assumptions, which I think is just a very dark road.
I think assumptive communication is a topic for another day, because it's an incredibly important topic when you talk about learning how to communicate with people, because most of us do that. And again, it goes back who was it? Albert Morabian and Ken Cooper did a study, and they said when you break down non-mediated conversation. Mediated conversation is something that uses a piece of technology, like writing on a page, a phone, walkie-talkie, something like that. There's a device or an intermediary between you and the recipient of the message. Non-mediated, face-to-face conversation. You hear me, you see me. So if you break down those communication components, they said only 7% was the words themselves. And the rest of it is tone, facial expression, volume, whatever. So it's important that even as we move in some ways to teletherapy, Zoom, whatever, we have to factor that into our understanding of and evaluation of how do I know what I'm hearing? How do I know what I'm seeing? Are you suicidal? Would I know that? Would I recognize that? How? What if I'm in another state? I'm in Missouri, you're in Colorado. You call me and say I'm depressed, and I know you live in Bumstill, Colorado. Do I have the police department's phone number? Can I send somebody over to check on you? Do I have a responsibility legally? Can I be sued? Have I done my job? There are all kinds of questions.
Right. So the first really big factor that is about listening, we've already talked about, which is focus. You have to pay attention to the other person in a way that that person recognizes that you are attending to them. And we've talked about some of the ways that you do that. Then the second big thing for me is empathy, that a person has to experience an empathic connection. And I think that this is really the difference between therapy that's going to work for you as a client and therapy that may not. And some people don't want that. If they feel that empathic connection, they may go find a different therapist because that may be scary.
So I have two reactions to that. One is, a lot of times people find a different therapist for different issues. So they may be comfortable talking to you about their marital problems, but they want to talk to somebody else about their child abuse. And that's fine.
Sure.
I mean, you should go where you feel hurt. But so the safe holding environment is that term that I use for the reflection of empathic listening. If you feel like I really see you, I really get you, and that I not approve of everything about you, but I accept you as you are, then that is the safe holding environment. It's my job as a therapist to create that experience for you, with my training, with my personality, with my expectations, with my attending and listening.
And so the creation of that unconditional positive regard, universal acceptance, however you want to phrase that, you believe that that is how the client feels empathically connected to the therapist.
I think you have to make the distinction. Carl Rogers' term, unconditional positive regard, doesn't mean approval.
Right.
It doesn't mean that I accept or agree with your value judgments or your behavior, but it means that I globally accept you as worthy of my acceptance and my attention.
Right.
So somehow I have to communicate that, even if I then have to say, you have to stop hitting your child. That's not going to go. Nothing's ever going to get better. It's only going to get worse. So if we want to make progress here, that's a behavior that you have to recognize you can no longer do.
Right.
If I have to say that to you, not in terms of me condemning you, you're a bad parent. You're an abusive parent. Although I may have to warn you, I'm a mandated reporter. And if you tell me this, I may have to call it in. But what I am trying to say is I recognize that you are struggling with this, and I still accept you as a person who's trying to make their way with failings. But part of what I believe is you can change.
Right.
This is a piece that must change. How can we find a way that you can attempt to change this piece and still be okay with who you are?
And I think that for me, when I was listening to you speaking there, it really drew to mind your joke about when people say, "Are you a Christian therapist?" and you say, "Yeah, I work with Christians."
Yeah.
And I think that that's really relevant, that, you know, sometimes you have to get out of a specific comfort zone. If you're just looking for confirmation bias, you're not really looking for therapy. If, you know, you're struggling with an unwanted pregnancy and you're going to somebody who thinks like you, I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying that that shouldn't be the reason why you decide to go see that person.
Absolutely. And that's still talking about clinical issues. It's more likely to be a problem if you are an agenda therapist. If I've got an agenda to prohibit abortions or to promote abortions, then I'm listening for an angle that I can pull you in the direction that I want you to go. That's not therapy.
That's right. So if you are listening for the opportunities to confirm the therapist I'm talking about, to confirm your beliefs and your worldview, that's not listening.
I used to work with a partner that was a very strong religious orientation, really active in his church and a part-time minister and so on. And he would talk in our conferences, because we do supervision with each other. He would talk about getting into these debates with people and bringing out his Bible and reading quotations that seemed relevant to him, to whatever they were presenting. And I kept telling him that's not your job. You're not here to proselytize. You're not here to convince or persuade to your religious perspective. You're here to hear what the client needs to have heard and help them find a way forward that works for them, not for you.
Right. And so, and this is a little bit tangential off topic, but, you know, so do you ever see that as being therapeutically valid? Let's break out the Bible and see what the Bible has to say.
I think it's a reasonable thing to do if you have a client with a religious orientation that's struggling with something. My church condemns this behavior. I've done this behavior. And the Bible says blah, 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 blah. Well, let's see if the Bible says that. Tell me how you understand this. What were you quoting? What's it coming from? Oh, it's a King James Version. It's 1 Corinthians. Or as Donald Trump would say, 2 Corinthians. And you say, well, what does your church say about that? And how do you understand what they mean? And have you spoken to someone within the hierarchy to explain your confusions or your turmoil? How do you... So again, I'm not proselytizing my perspective. I am saying use your own experience, use your own education, your own background, your own connections to find a way to process what you're struggling with that can lead you to peace. It can lead you to change if change is necessary, acceptance if it's not.
So when would the therapist make that decision that, okay, this is the time to bring it? So let me start a different way. So I kind of think of that in a similar way as I think of the big book when I'm dealing with people who are substance abusers. There are times when people want to talk about, you know, what's written in the literature of the recovery community, and I don't typically do that, but there are times where I say, okay, this person is making a relevant request about understanding or trying to process something, and we'll look in the big book and read what the big book says.
So you're more comfortable with the big book and your experiences with it. I would be less comfortable. I mean, from my background, my training, my education, my life, I would be less comfortable explaining to somebody something from the Bible. I would recommend that they go to their minister or someone that their minister would recommend for interpretation. Where I use it clinically is more when somebody says, I've sinned and I can't be forgiven. I've done this horrible thing. And I said, well, what does your church teach you about forgiveness? What does your church or your religion teach you about forgiveness? Can we find documentation? Can we find quotations? Can we find something? But how do you understand what that means? And they'll say, well, typically they'll say, well, God forgives all sinners who come to him. All right, so why aren't you included in that? You know, what is it about you that's so bad and so ugly and so unacceptable that even God would reject you? You know, isn't that an arrogance on your part? Isn't that a conceit on your part? What does your church say? How do you find comfort? I mean, grieving, yeah, let's talk about the grief. Let's feel the grief. But self-punishment, self-entrapment, you know, I can't change. Now I have to carry this and I'm stained and I'm unacceptable. That's going to get in the way of you living your life. Can we find a way to put it down?
So kind of just to wrap this up, if you had to give somebody doing therapy a primer on good listening, how would you define that for somebody doing therapy?
Don't get in the way. Pay attention. Read the nonverbals. Check for accuracy. Get feedback.
And I would say make sure that whatever you're doing, the attention that you are paying to the client is focused on them and what their needs are and not focused on you. Like you're not dropping pearls of wisdom. You're not,
But also, like, so I taught in a graduate program for 35 years. And the classes were at night. They were from 5:30 to 9:30 at night. People that came to those classes had worked a full day.
I remember.
Regularly, they would 7:30, 8 o'clock start saying, "Can we go home? Can we go? I'm tired. This is boring." You know, or they'd start playing. Especially when computers became pervasive, they'd be checking their email or checking the ball game score and stuff like that. And I would tell them, "This is a training opportunity. Your job is to park your stuff and pay attention to mine. And if you can't do it in this class, how are you going to do it in an office with somebody?"
Right.
So you need to look at your own behavior. You need to learn your own self-control. You need to learn how to pay attention on demand because you're on the clock.
Exactly.
Somebody's paying you money.
Right. And so you can't just do it when you feel like it.
Right. You got to learn the skill.
That's right. So hopefully that was beneficial for somebody out there, and you can always get a hold of us at psychwithmike.com. We would really appreciate if as many people as, well, I'm just not even going to say that. I'm just going to say go to YouTube and find Psych with Mike on YouTube. Go to Apple Podcasts and find Psych with Mike on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to the show and leave a comment on the Apple Podcasts. Those are things that really, really help us out. As always, the music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue, and if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.